She's the woman behind MacLeod's Daughters, so you just know that Posie Graeme-Evans is going to write strong, memorable female characters. In The Island House, she interweaves two stories across time and in the magical setting of a Scottish island. Posie, welcome to Bookshots.
Thank you.
You've had a passion for ancient history since your student days, haven't you?
I cannot tell a lie, yes. I cannot tell a lie. And, you know, who knows what it is that draws you. But, yes, I wanted to be an archaeologist, really quite passionately. And I saw a mummified foot when I was 6 in the Museum of Adelaide, a pharaonic foot. I was one of those strange little girls who was taken to museums for a reward if I'd been particularly good. And I did like that foot, and that foot stayed with me for a very long time. High status foot, mind you. And I was lucky enough also because of what my parents did. We moved around a lot, and so I got to go to places and stand in the ruins at Salamis, and they're resonant.
Well, these places were obviously very potent for you, and so it's no accident that they're very resonant as well for Freya Dane, your archaeologist, who is obviously a little bit you.
Do you know, it's interesting. I'm not an autobiographical writer, and I guess in my other work in TV, I've made up so many characters in my life. And someone brilliant said, you know, every character you write is you. I'm not completely convinced about that. I think there are some aspects for sure, but they're amalgams.
Of course, they're composites.
They are.
But it might be that Freya is a facet of you. So introduce us to her as one of the two heroines of The Island House.
I liked Freya. Freya's fairly spiky and fairly independent, and she's had to be. You know, this is a kid, a woman. We meet her when she's in her mid-20s, but she's had the experience that so many Gen X and Gen Y have had of the parents splitting up, of the father departing from her life. And I think a fatherless girl is a common experience, and I think it's tough.
So she's on a bit of a quest in this book, isn't she? What is the quest, and where does it take her?
It takes her to a tiny island called Finnar.
Is that a real island?
It's not, but I have been to Scotland, I am pleased to say, many times, well, not many times, twice I've gone to Scotland researching this book. And I went to the west. I was on the islands of Lewis and Harris last year, stunning. And I went to the east, and so it's an amalgam of those landscapes. So the tiny island of Finnar is a locus in the past, because the story takes place in the past and the present, of three forms of religion, of the Christians who've moved in and set up a monastery, displacing the local Pictish people and stopping them coming to the island, pretty much. And then the Vikings turn up and all hell breaks loose, and you know, so there's the Vikings and their code as well. But in the present, there's this girl Freya, and she is, as we all do in our 20s, she's trying to find herself. She thinks she's a bird of passage. Her father lived on that island. She thinks she's not going to stay. And she goes there one rainy summer, and she taps into her dead father's work, but she's instinctively a far greater archaeologist than he was. So she finishes it. My God, does she finish it? What is she searching for? She's searching for herself. And it's not a conscious thing, and I don't think, not for many people, is it a conscious thing.
What is it, though, about the particular past that you've chosen to conjure up in this book that is so powerful for you? Because you do evoke it very vividly and also in great detail, so that we really get to understand a fairly brutal, harsh way of life. What was its appeal for you?
What was the appeal? Well, I think human nature is human nature, no matter what era it comes from, no matter what it's dressed in, no matter what it eats, no matter what it believes. I think the drives are the same. But we live in a world which, our experience in Australia, generally, even though we might not think this, we are protected from actual violence. People will experience violence, but most people don't. They read about it. That was a world, when the Vikings turned up, that every spring those boats came over the horizon and sacked the place. Yeah. And they were looking for slaves. They were looking for, and they called them trade goods. And they took them to the autumn markets, and then they became farmers. And I was just very interested in them as a people. And I was interested in what drove them from their land, because essentially they came from somewhere where there wasn't enough land to feed the people. And so they had to. They were exporters. They were entrepreneurs. So I like the pragmatism of them. I have lived through moments in my life when my life changed. And it's what you cannot control interests me very much.
Now, what about Signe, our Pictish girl? Because she is caught up in a maelstrom of violence. She's having to hide. She's fighting for survival. She's buffeted on all sides by history. So how did you create her without creating a victim?
I think it's the thing about Signe is she is a person with great religious conviction. Now, when we meet her, she's a child and she believes utterly in the relationship of her society to the gods of her world. And I went to various standing stones in Scotland. I was on the island of Lewis and Harris. We went to a place called, they say Callanish. Well, they are so enigmatic, but they are so resonant. You can almost stand by those stones and feel something, I don't know. So I wanted to stand in places where I think she might have stood. And so a person who has a faith is driven by a source outside themselves. There's a sense of duty and self-sacrifice. And again, that's completely natural to that character, and it seems to me to that world, because she makes the journey from being an animist. Circumstances change for her and she thinks she must become a Christian, and she goes back to her original religion at the end. Hers is a tough, tough life, but she has a spirit which sustains her. Now, I'm not an overtly religious person. I envy people who can be, though.
Now, Posie, given your experience in television, at what point then, consciously or unconsciously, but I'm imagining consciously, do you decide we've got to introduce some romance here? There's all this brutality and violence in the past, but as far as Freya's concerned, there are men around her. The society, the island that she's living on is a seafaring island of fishermen, so it's a fairly masculine environment. So at what point did you decide, got to have a love interest?
But I didn't. I didn't decide. I live now where wooden boats are built. And it is, I live in Tasmania now. I mean, I spend a third of my time in Sydney still, but I'm down there. It's a maritime world.
It's a bit like Scotland.
They are seafarers. I shot a trailer with the local Viking reenactors, and we shot Tasmania for Scotland. I had Vikings charging around at the top of Mount Wellington, proper Vikings, dressed in all the gear, chain mail, waving swords. I can tell you the Chinese tourists were gobsmacked. It was a wonderful experience. We had the best day. But I interpolated shots of Scotland that I'd shot principally last year and into that, and it's seamless. Yeah. And I found beaches in Scotland that look like our beaches.
The light would be the same to some extent.
It is,
yeah.
And it's a granite landscape.
Yes.
So I love all of that, and so it seemed natural to me. One of the other pieces of research that I did, and this was a few years ago, but God, it changed how I thought about things, especially with this book. I went to Roskilde, which is the Viking ship museum in Denmark, and there they sit these things, which were in the water for 1,000 years, and they took them out, and they are perfectly made weapons of war. They are very beautiful and very deadly. And then there are nars, I think that's how you say it, which are trading vessels, which are sort of broader in their beam. But the things which were made to have 30 men rowing on each side, and that's it, and there's nothing but the benches, and these are the things they crossed oceans in, and they are this wide, you know? Well, no, that's a little bit, I mean, they're not wide.
Yeah, no, I know, I've seen them.
60 men. And you'd have to be very, I mean, that rearranged my head when I saw that. I thought, wow, there's the fisherman, the kindly fisherman. We love the idea of the kindly fisherman, the man of the sea. There's a great mystique in that. And I'd spent my life making a series about women.
Exactly.
So I was quite interested to do Men in the Sea.
But love, let's just come back to romance.
I'm sorry, but a long discussion, apologies. But, okay, so love. I'm very interested in what it is that drives people together and what holds them apart, and how you can find tensile strength in a relationship, okay? But that's all at the back of my head. And I thought Freya Dane was not successful emotionally, and I thought that came out of her childhood. And so I wanted, if I wanted anything conscious, which I'm really not sure that I did, but I can talk about it, I suppose, now to construe it, I think she needed to surrender. This is a girl who was going, I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine. I'm completely fine. I'm absolutely fine. Sorry, you don't live in my flat if I don't want you to. Bye. And then something happens in her life, forces much, much, much bigger than Freya Dane's ever had to cope with. And bang, down she goes. And the other thing is, I am an optimist. I believe that love is probably the most profound thing we ever experience.
One of the things that I'm intrigued about is your sense of time seems to be kind of fluid, and you were quoted, I think, somewhere as saying that for you time is not linear. No. So can you explain how you use time in the book?
Well, okay, I will tell you a story. Went to 2 Neolithic passage tombs, one in Ireland, one on the Orkneys. And in both places, surrounded by tourists, I had a very similar experience, which is that if I held out my hand, someone would grab my hand, as if you know, the people have described time as a curtain.
It's something almost supernatural.
Yes. Oh, yes. I have a very broad romantic mystical streak. I just do. And I can't fight it, so I write about it. And I loved both these experiences. Maze Howe on Orkney, a Neolithic passage tomb, has Viking graffiti in it. And get this.
We was here.
We was here. No, he talks about, one of the Vikings talks about something like Elfreda is the fairest of women, you know, and there it is. All those births and deaths and lives, and I'm them, and I feel like it's a chain of hands. That's what I feel. And that's, I let that rip. I let that rip. I don't try to control that. I adore exploring that.